In this video we're going to be tying a little stonefly called the little yellow Sloan. First thing we're going to do is we're going to start with a black bead on the front of the hook. And I'm going to use some Hopper Yellow UTC 70, and I'm going to take this about a quarter to half a way down the bend of the hook. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small amount of SLF yellow stonefly dubbing. I'm literally just going to take a tiny little pinch, and what I'm going to do is just build up a small ball of dubbing right at the back of the fly. All this is going to do is actually act as a prop for my tail. And the tail, I'm just going to use some tan little Biots, Goose Biots, and I want it to be about 3/4 of the length of the entire length of the hook. And I'm going to tie this in so that the tail splays away from the shank of the hook. You can see there how the tail is splaying away. And you can tie these in both at the same time, or you can do them one at a time like I am doing. It's a little easier to do it one at a time, at least with this technique. Once I have them both tied in, I'm just going to take my thread all the way back to that ball of dubbing, and it will force those two Biots away from each other. Then I'm going to take my thread almost all the way forward. I'm going to stop about the 3/4 portion of the shank of the hook. Then I'm going to take some light stonefly or dark stonefly midge tubing, and I'm going to tie that in up at the 3/4 point and just wrap it all the way back to where I tied in those tails. It's important to tie it in up at that 3/4 point and then wrap back, because I want this body to be nice and even. If I tied it in at the back and didn't start up near the thorax, now I'd have a big lump at the back of the fly. And once I've got it tied in, all I'm doing now is I'm going to build up a slight taper from the back forward. And all this is kind of emulating the shape of a stonefly. It doesn't need to be much. I'm just slowly kind of building it up. Once you have somewhat of a taper going, you're ready to add the modeling to the fly. And this is all to taste. You can add a lot of modeling or none, or just a little, whatever you want to do. But all I'm going to do is just take a brown marker. I'm just going to kind of marker up the thread. If you want your stonefly to be more brown, then of course you add more. If you want there to be less, then you add less. It's just personal taste. Then I'm going to take this midge tubing and I'm going to stretch it as I wrap it. I'm going to pull it tight and wrap forward. You can see how it's magnifying that marker that I made. Makes it look nice and lifelike. Then I'm just going to capture that midge tubing and tie it all off. Then I'm going to take my thread back to that 3/4 point. I'm going to wrap back ever so slightly over the midge tubing that I just made. Then I'm going to take some more of that golden stone dubbing, and all I'm going to do is just kind of add another prop. This is going to be a prop for the wing casing. So another small smidgen of dubbing. Careful not to overdo it. Like I said, at this point it's just acting as a prop. Then I'm going to take a goose feather, and I've coated it with fixative. I've actually used Zap-A-Gap brush-on super glue. All I'm going to do is just cut a little V-notch in it, just like so. Then what we're going to do is we're going to tie this in as a wing case. Facing back. And I only want the wing case to barely reach over that ball of dubbing that we just put into place. Once I get it tied in, I can just trim out the excess. Then we need to tie in a pair of legs, and what I'm going to use is just some India henback in natural color. Natural color kind of has this natural mottled look to it. And I'm going to take a clump of about a dozen or so, and I'm going to tie these in so they are just barely longer than the casing. And I do that on one side, and I just repeat the exact same thing on the other side. Try to get them as even as you can. Once you have those both tied in, you can trim out the excess portion. Now we're ready for another smidgen of dubbing. Again, careful not to overdo it too much with the dubbing. All we need to do is just cover up our thread wraps. I'm going to build this one slightly larger than the one we just did at the back. That will make our second wing casing stand up a little bit more pronounced. The back one is supposed to be less subtle, or more subtle I should say. I'm going to take my thread right up to the bead. I left a little bit of a space for that last wing casing. And I'm just going to use the same turkey. I'm going to cut a V-notch in it, just like I did in the other one. And we're going to tie this in so that it is just shorter than the first wing case that we tied in. Then you can trim out the excess. Now we are ready to tie in the front legs. We're going to use the same hen, and we'll use just a few more fibers for the front legs, and we'll make them slightly longer than we did the back legs. And we can trim out the excess. Now we need to add the last part, which is the antenna. And we're going to use those same tan Goose Biots. We're going to face them forward. Again, splaying away from the fly itself. Try to make them roughly the same length. Once you get those tied in, then you can carefully cut out the butts of those biots. Then to finish the fly off, we are going to take a very small amount of that golden stone dubbing. I'm just going to barely coat the thread, just enough to hide all of our thread wraps, and just tie everything together. I'm going to very lightly apply it, peel any of the remaining away. Then we can whip finish with a few wraps. And any stray fibers that you have, you can get in there and trim any of those out. There's always some kind of at the back end of the fly. Any long fibers you can pull out of there, or keep them if you like. Sometimes that adds a little bit of bugginess to the fly. Then we need to seal the wing cases, and for that I'm just going to use a little bit of UV fly finish, and I'm just going to add it to the back portion of that first wing case that we tied in. And at this point you do want to make sure any of the long fuzzies are cut from that area, because any fuzzies will keep you from cleanly applying that fly finish. I usually like to add just kind of a little bit of it at a time. And I'll bring the bubble all the way forward. Then you can cure it. If you want your bubble to be a little more pronounced, then you can add a second layer. Just kind of a little epoxy back. And on Sloan's recipe, he'll actually take his marker and he will marker up the tail and the antenna a little bit. You can skip it. It's just a very subtle detail. It just darkens them up. He'll kind of color in the dubbing a little bit as well, but like I said, it's very subtle. But just makes the fly look a little bit more like the real thing. And that is the little yellow Sloan. Great little stonefly pattern. You can also tie this fly in black as well. I like this golden color. This is my favorite. You can find all the materials to tie this fly on our website, intheriffle.com. If you're watching this via YouTube, there's a link below this video in the description panel. And there you can follow that link to our website. There you can find the recipe as well as the materials to tie the fly. That is the little yellow Sloan.